Good day to you as we continue on through these very uncertain times, and in some small way at least. I hope that this class is providing those of you who are able to continue with it some kind of an outlet or a distraction from what's going on. And certainly, what we're learning here in this class, you should, on your own, if you're a true scholar, a true person who is curious, you should be applying some of the concepts that we're talking about to the coverage of the coronavirus, as well as all media types, not just what we talk about in this class. And as we've gone through these perspectives, if you've been wondering to yourself, where is the person in all of this? We've looked at organizations, we've looked at signs and symbols, we've looked at representations of sexuality. Where is like the person in all of this? Well, that's what we're getting to today. We're taking on the chapter on reception analysis. It's our next chapter, chapter 10, taking on reception analysis. It focuses on the audience. It says, let's not look at the text as the determinant of meaning. Meaning doesn't come from a text. Meaning comes from the interaction between the audience and the text. And the meaning has to be created by the audience member. It's the human being that creates the meaning. There's no meaning in a glass of water. There's no meaning in there. The meaning comes from the person who drinks. In this case, oh, it's a glass that I got in Mexico. It has different meaning to me than it will have to you. I got it because I like the look of it. It's original. There's only one of a kind. It's not mass produced. You see what I mean? It's in me, the meaning for that glass. It's not in you. And so that's what this perspective takes a look at. It tries to take a look at the interaction between the audience and the text, which we are again using as a synonym for media content. And by the way, this borrows a lot from rhetorical analysis, even though I kind of dissed DISS, rhetorical analysis a couple moments ago. This perspective does borrow very much from it because the audience is a focus of rhetorical analysis. So let's go on to some of the key terms now. The first one being encoding/decoding, really two terms that we have there. And the author is Stuart Hall. We've already mentioned him before under our cultural analysis chapter. He comes from that Birmingham school of thought, that Birmingham school of philosophy. We've got these two terms, encoding and decoding. They should not be foreign to you. You've had them in a very early intro class, probably even in intro to mass media as well, but we're talking about them differently here. We're talking about how each culture has a different code, a different set of rules for how you communicate. And by that, I mean that we all have our ways of communicating with an audience, depending on who that audience is, and the way that we communicate is going to be different. I have friends who I only call dude. I have friends that I only call bro, and they're different from the friends that I call dude. I don't know if I can explain it right now, but I have other friends that I call mate, and that's an English term from my English background. You have friends, you have sets of people that you come into contact with, employees, uh, professors, friends from your high school versus friends at college, and you have different ways of speaking with them. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about codes or encoding. So encoding, when we look at it from a critical perspective, that's what this course is. Encoding is concerned with how dominant ideologies, the ideologies that are present in the media at the expense of others, like we've already been talking about, for example, feminist ideology and queer analysis, the dominant ideologies, how they create mass-mediated texts. And then these texts result in a preferred reading. You'll pick up more on this in the chapter. It's a really interesting idea how we come to gain meaning. And one of the ways is through this idea of preferred reading, that there is a preferred suggested way of interpreting whatever the media text is that we're looking at. There's dominant codes that are reinforcing the preferred reading. For example, when President Trump came out to give his press conference a few days ago in the media light in a press conference, he was intending to calm things down, but because of some factual misstatements and just general nervousness, that did not happen. And so the preferred reading that was supposed to happen there did not happen. And it shows that the audience has really the control over the meaning. They are the ones that came to that meaning. We saw that in the stock market dive bombing the very next day, among other reactions. So the encoding is assigning symbols to the meaning that we want to get, and those symbols become the code. They can be sign language, they can be emojis, they can be the way that a web page is laid out. The contact us is always at the bottom. That's just, we've come to understand that. It's a way that web pages are encoded. Decoding is the opposite. Decoding is focusing on the audience, is focusing on how the audience attributes meaning to the text. And you've got three levels of it. You've got a dominant, and you've got an oppositional, and you've got negotiated meanings. I'm going to let you read those for your own. Very interesting material there. Dominant, oppositional, and negotiated meanings. Next up, we're going to talk about meanings in and of itself. There's a word for it. It's called polysemy. Polysemy. Poly means many. Sem is the root word for semiotics or meaning. So polysemy means many meanings. And one of the earliest philosophers to write on this, a philosopher in the 1800s, was John Fiske. He's from England. And he said it's not a question of whether a text has many meanings. It's a question of how many meanings there are. I mean, you can watch an episode of Shameless. Most of you have probably seen Shameless on television, and you can see so many layers of commentary on many different things. You have commentary on racial relations. The family has a mixed race makeup. You have commentary on the healthcare system. You have commentary on people who are trying to make it, be on the make in society. And that's, if you know what I mean by that, it's an English phrase where they're trying to get out of really working and they're trying to con people all the time. That's the lead character. That's Frank. And so there's many different layers of meanings there, and there's many more as well, which is aside from just the basic plot. Excuse me. Yeah, many meanings. Another philosopher to address this was Celeste Condit, Condit. She's still around, Celeste Condit. She's a scholar at the University of Georgia. And she argues that dominant ideologies prevent some audiences from experiencing all codes, which is to say that media can have multiple codes. But if there's an ideology that is suppressing some of those codes, if there is a dominant ideology, it necessarily means that there are ideologies that are being subverted to that ideology, which have different codes. For example, if we do want to look at the coronavirus and talking about China, when we've talked about it, has always been portrayed in our media as a fierce competitor, as a place that is under totalitarian communist regime. It's a place that's dirty. It's a place with people that are exotic at the very least, strange at the very worst. These are qualities that are constantly portrayed as part of the, you could say, American ideology of China in the media. And so is it not expository? Does it not show us that that is a dominant ideology that's prevented us from realizing, well, you know what? China has actually got a grip on coronavirus, at least more than other nations that have had outbreaks right now because of steps that they have taken or continue to take. And so that subcode there, what is so good about China? What are they doing? It's not breaking through. What are they doing with the way that they're testing, with the way they're screening? Must be doing something, right? That's where it supposedly started. So that, and even that is in and of a question. Is that where the coronavirus started? It's impossible to know, but it is possible that it's part of that dominant ideology, which is subverting another code that may suggest that it came from somewhere else. There's different ways that you can engage in reading a text. When I say reading, I'm using it in the same way that we use text to refer to media content. Reading means taking it in, interpreting. That's what reading a text means when we're talking about it in a media criticism class. And you've got different ways of reading text. And so you've got first of all, the concept of polyvalence. And that's when receivers disagree with the preferred text, but they also disagree amongst themselves. Like you have people who can watch the NFL football and they really can't stand, let's say, the Dallas Cowboys. That's a very big team that Pennsylvanians don't like they'd like to not like, if you know what I mean. But then amongst Cowboys haters, so to speak, you have different people talking about different reasons why. No, it's the receivers. No, it's the coaching staff. No, it's the way that they're braggadocio on the field. So that's what polyvalence is, where you have disagreement even amongst the people who disagree with the preferred text. You've got other kinds of reading that go on there, including these ones you can investigate on your own. Resistive reading, that's a very active form of reading. And then you have strategic ambiguity, and that's very interesting. A lot of these ideas are used actually by the creators of media content, especially film creators, because they want the audience involved. And sometimes the audience gets involved in ways that they never imagined. The Rocky Horror Picture Show was not created to have the kind of audience interaction that gets in movie theaters even to this day, where people go and they yell out to the characters in the film before the characters say their lines, and there's a lot of sexual innuendo. Sometimes strategic ambiguity and the other kinds of things that are taking place are not on purpose, but they take place anyhow because the meaning is in the audience. Got another term there called hermeneutic depth. I'd like you to take a look at that as well. So the next critic we're going to talk about now, we refer to our theorists as critics sometimes, is Stanley Fish. His area of criticism was interpretive communities. And in interpretive communities, he says you want to have reader-centered criticism. You want to have criticism, like we're doing today, that's focused on the reader process, that not reader read a book, but taking in media content process, because media resides in all audiences. And so when you have interpretive communities, you have groups who interpret texts. I'm not talking about book of the month clubs. I could be talking about a bunch of students sitting around in a dorm room, listening to a song, trying to figure out what was meant by a lyric, or trying to figure out how a sound was injected into that song. These are interpretive groups. These are readers and authors at the same time who belong to the same communities, and they discuss similar meanings. Which takes us to our final item for today, which is ethnographic research and memory. That term ethnographic means it's basically the opposite of statistical survey research, where you're giving people surveys and questionnaires. Ethnographic research is going into the field and interviewing people, observing people. So ethnographic research and memory comes out of the field of anthropology and sociology. We've been borrowing from philosophy so far. We've been borrowing from psychologists. We've been borrowing from some rhetoricians in this class. We're borrowing from anthropology and sociology here. It's understanding a culture from the perspective of that culture. It's trying to understand it from their perspective. You may say to yourself, I can't believe that they don't eat cows in India. I mean, they have so much starvation over there. How is that possible? Okay, well, maybe you should learn more about Hinduism. Maybe you should learn more about how the cow is sacred. And by the way, what would be your reaction if India people, we don't want to say Indians, but they are actually Indians, but it gives off the wrong connotation. What would you say if Indian people say, can you believe that they don't eat dogs in the United States when they have so much poverty in the United States? So, well, that's a cultural difference. And it's an example of how you cannot understand another culture through the culture's viewpoint. And a lot of this is influenced by media. I mean, you think about the depictions that you've seen of India in your entire life. You're probably not going to go there. I don't know if you'll even meet somebody from India. You'll probably pass somebody in New York if you do. But pretty much everything you're going to know about India is probably by some esoteric films that come out of Bollywood, the biggest TV industry, the biggest film industry in the world, by the way, bigger than Hollywood. Or you're going to see some glimpse of India through a natural catastrophe or some kind of horrible crime that took place. Rapes are often covered in India. Yeah, so ethnographic studies focus on really getting in there and understanding the culture from the perspective of that culture. You can read more about that and why it's even of use to media criticism on your own when you go through this chapter. That's going to do it for reception analysis. The meaning is in you.